If you feel like you're living life depleted and on the verge of giving up, then this video is for you. It's about the goodness of giving up. Hello, I'm Robarge, an attachment-focused psychotherapist and a relationship educator, and I like to talk about how to heal attachment trauma and improve our relationships. And on this video, let's talk about living on the verge of giving up. Let's explore specifically what this means and also name concrete action steps for our self-directed healing work. Now, for my work with clients over the years, I have been developing and promoting a model of self-directed healing. At its core, it's about three things: listening to self-wisdom, leading with self-action, and choosing self-compassion. And all three of those things combined together equals loving yourself. So for today, we want to apply this model of self-directed healing work to this topic of giving up. Let me share with you the format of the video. I try to organize the content so that it covers three areas: what it is, how it works, and then also specific action steps. The goal is to help you integrate these ideas into your healing process. If you like this video, please do all the things, and I know you know what I'm talking about. That's the subscribe. Please click like, please leave a comment. And I know you have heard this 800 times from other YouTube creators. It really does help me when you subscribe. Also, if you value these videos, if you receive benefit, then please consider becoming a sustaining supporter. You can make a donation, you can join us in the membership community, improve your relationships, or you could purchase one of my courses. Thank you in advance for your contribution and for supporting my work. Now, let's jump in and talk about giving up. And I really like that place right before giving up, thinking about living on the verge of giving up. And what does all of this mean? I want to very quickly say this is not a video about suicide. So we want to talk about the meaning of giving up, how it's universal. Many of us feel this way from time to time, and it can serve as a gateway. And having the skill of giving up comes with some goodness. There's goodness in giving up. However, I am not talking about feeling suicidal and contemplating ending one's life. So this video is not intended to be about that topic. However, of course, our brain goes there, like we think about it, or we think that perhaps that's what we mean when we hear giving up. And so there's a boundary here that we're not going to talk about that. But if in fact it is something that you are working with or struggling with or noticing these kind of suicidal thoughts, where you actually think that there's some kind of physical ending or thinking about ending your life, then please do reach out for help to the National Suicide Hotline, depending on what country you live in, depending on the healthcare system, mental health organizations, community mental health organizations. It's really important to reach out and to talk to someone about these feelings. So that being said, I do want to also acknowledge there is a possibly universal aspect to having suicidal thoughts, in that we reach our capacity where we just feel like things are too much and we want something to end, and the brain somehow defaults to, well, maybe our life will just end. So we're not suicidal. We know that we're not suicidal, but we have this kind of thinking, something really has to end. So I like the metaphor of suicide, this idea of a psychic death, this idea of a part of ourself is dying. And if we participate in this as a metaphorical death, that's also a way to frame seeing the urgency as a call to action, that something incredibly is out of balance. And there's a part of us that has been exploited by ourselves. There's a part of us that we have run ourselves into the ground. There's a part of ourselves that we just feel so completely without resource. And we contemplate, something has got to give. We have got to give up. This is often the intersection of entering therapy this need to give up, to want to give up, to notice how things are not, there's just not a lot of life happening, and that we're exhausted and we're depleted and we're living in a pressure cooker. And I've had a number of clients, I can think of people who work too hard and people who are trying to prove that they matter, or that they're good enough, or that they're special. And they have some childhood belief, doesn't have to be in childhood, could have been learned later in life. But for many of us, it comes out of attachment trauma or all other types of trauma that impacts our sense of self. And that if we had caregivers and family members who were not quite able to invest in knowing us, that itself can show up as attachment trauma, and that the people that were caring for us and that we were caring for them, they were unable to know who we are as a person. And this impacts our sense of self. And then we think, well, maybe I'm just not worth knowing. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm not good enough. So I have to try harder. I have to try to be noticed. I have to try to be good enough. I have to try to be special. I have to try to achieve in a way so that I do matter. And this just sets us up on a treadmill of exhaustion. And so this idea of a psychic death, of something dying, I can think of a number of clients that I've worked with over the years, and we have this conversation. Could you imagine letting go? Could you imagine giving up on the need to be special, the need to prove that you're good enough? And this is really hard because it's a core belief ingrained in who we are. So I wanted to highlight that as an example of one way that many of us come into therapy, is that the way that we're approaching life is actually depleting us of life. And that to give up is also the entry point or the gateway to entering the next chapter of our healing work. Giving up can also mean the need for rest. Just most simplistically, the basic, we are exhausted and we need to rest. Let's talk about resistance. Let's talk about judgments. Let's talk about how we assign meaning to giving up, and that to give up is to be a failure. And then we personalize it and we say, well, I am a failure. I can't give up because I'll be a failure. We assign meaning to giving up in that we are now weak. And the goal is to be strong. The goal is to always be strong. So if I give up, then I am weak. We link giving up to shame, and that we shame ourselves for needing a break. We shame ourselves for feeling depleted. We shame ourselves for not being able just to keep going. So the judgment creates a barrier to listening to our body, and listening to our mind, and listening to this alarm, listening to the urgency, this call inside of us that says, things are, we really need attention. I love, there's a line from Arthur Miller's My Three Sons. I think it's called My Three Sons. No. That's a different one. It's Death of a Salesman. And it's when the mother says, attention must be paid. She's talking about the relationships in the family with the sons and the fathers, but the son and the father. But this line has always stood out for me. Attention must be paid. That's what's happening in our body when we're feeling pain, when we're feeling we have health issues. We are noticing just can't focus. Our sleeping habits shift and change, either too much or too little. Depression comes in. We just feel numb. All of these indicators are like knocking. It's like this part of ourselves knocking on the door saying, answer the call, answer the call. And then the voice of the mother from this Death of a Salesman is, attention must be paid. So being on the verge of giving up is an invitation to listen to what your body is telling you. And I'm sure either for you in your own life, or it's not very hard to find people who they don't listen to their body. They don't listen to this call. And what happens is they have other serious health issues that really frighten them, or they get a wake-up call where they had ignored the smaller wake-up calls until they get a very large health scare. And at that time, we're really confronted and faced with giving up. Many of us do not know how to give up. It's not in part of our family. It's not part of our friends circle. And specifically, many societies, the culture is produce, produce, produce. Be productive, keep going. Smile and keep going, one foot in front of the other. There's not a lot of emphasis placed on, well, let's actually slow down. Let's not be productive. Let's move into a state of contemplation and of rest. And there's not a need to keep trying to strive. It's this incredible hook, or this commitment to striving. And what I've already mentioned earlier, when it links to our identity of I'm not good enough, or I don't matter, or I need to be special, we're striving to be somebody. And so giving up is a way of saying, can we put on hold? Can we take a break from needing to be somebody? And so for many of us, this also includes then looking at what we would call our ego self, or this part, ego as a construct of who we think that we're supposed to be, and realizing that it has taken over in such a way that we don't feel authentic. We don't feel that we're being true to ourselves. Instead, we're being driven by this idea of who we're supposed to be. So giving up can include taking a break, or even confronting this striving, this ongoing striving to constantly be somebody, and to arrive, and to achieve, and to get success, and to be happy, more. And even hearing myself talk about it in this moment, it's exhausting. I have some notes here, and I'm just looking at my notes as we continue to move into these ideas. Something about giving up that many of us know, and either we might not know it in the forefront of our mind, but when we really start thinking about giving up, we're aware that it means inviting in pain. So that if we're on the verge of giving up, we're living with a certain amount of suffering, and we're trying to manage this suffering, and it keeps growing and growing. It's hard to handle. I get the image of pushing a really heavy wheelbarrow, or carrying a burden on your shoulders, or a big knapsack, a big backpack that you have rocks, this burden of life, and you just keep going. And many of us are aware that the suffering that we're experiencing, the suffering that we're carrying, to give up means that we look at the suffering, means that we actually invite it in. And so there's this resistance that we might know that we need to give up, but we are frightened of giving up if it means feeling pain, feeling our suffering more intensely or more directly, and having direct contact with the thing that we're keeping ourselves so busy and we're so out of balance. Well, then we might need to not only look at why we're out of balance, but look at the underlying reasons and causes. And many of us don't want to do that, which is why we have run ourselves into the ground, and why we feel so incredibly depleted, and that we want to give up, but we can't, or we won't. And we also, a very common idea for a number of people, for a number of us, especially in therapy, when beginning to negotiate the touching the suffering and exploring what that suffering is, many of us have this idea that that it opens the floodgates, or there's this wall or a dam that's holding back all of these feelings and pain that we don't want to experience. And that if we open the floodgates, if we allow ourselves to look over the wall and begin to invite some of the feelings around that suffering, that it will be all-consuming, it will derail our lives, it will be just too much, we won't be able to function, and it won't stop. We'll be drowning. So naturally, that is a very fair, legitimate concern. And if we choose to go slowly, we choose to resource ourselves as we touch our suffering, we begin to learn some skills of how to work with suffering. And there's this practice of touch it and pull out and take a break. It's referred to as titration. We move into the activation, and then we allow ourselves to come back into equilibrium, to digest, to integrate, to return to a neutral state in the moment. And then we do another round. We do another chapter. This is very controlled. This is very methodical. So giving up doesn't necessarily mean chaos, although emotionally it might feel like chaos, especially initially, if you're not used to inviting in this suffering. Another idea to share here, the reason why we think we're going to be flooded and overwhelmed and not be able to manage this, is because it means courting trauma activation and courting our history of trauma. And it is true that as a trauma symptom, we can get overactivated where our nervous system cannot manage the intensity, and we're going to be re-experiencing trauma activation the same way we did historically. Or also another framework here is that trauma occurred to us, or occurred mostly, and again, this is not true for everyone, but many times occurred for us in our developmental years, our early years, our childhood. And so the idea of inviting in some of this old residual pain and suffering and this trauma energy to finally give up and say, let's enter a chapter of healing work and a chapter of gentleness and compassion and kindness and rest. We need to rest as we're building up our resources to enter this place of healing and to explore this trauma. We've never done this before because when we were a child, we did not have the resources. We were very young. We were overwhelmed with the traumatic experience or the traumatic energy. Our nervous system, our body could not manage it. So it's very common, many of us, when we're trying to enter this place, we begin by giving up. We want to start working with our suffering. And what happens is the age regression occurs, or our mind is assuming the only reference point we have is when we felt this depth of trauma, this making sense of what happened, what didn't happen, the meaning we assign to our history of how we got here. The reference point for that, its most intense place, was when we were going through it in childhood, and we were seeing things through the lens of the child. And we were operating in a system with the limited resources that we had at the time. So it makes sense that in our current adult life, in this moment, to be willing to give up and invite in our suffering, we immediately assume, or we think we're going to see it through the same lens of that of a child. And we think that we're going to have our limited resources that we had as a child. And that's not true. We are able to grow and learn and come from a wisdom place, our adult wisdom self, and be able to assemble and name what are the resources that we need in order to begin this process. Now, in this moment, something that we're going to do throughout this video is let's just take a breath. And I realize I've been talking, a lot of ideas, sharing a lot of ideas here. And breathing, slowing down, pausing, checking in with your body. This is an ongoing process. What do you notice in your breath? What do you notice in this moment? What parts of your body have tension? What parts of your body are neutral? What parts of your body are tingling? What do you notice in the rise and fall of your chest when you're breathing? And what about right now? And take a breath. So giving up is an invitation to participate in the present moment. and to begin to assess, well, how are you doing in this moment? What do you notice right now? How's your body? How's your breathing? And we repeat this. We train ourselves to be able to check in with our own experience. And this is the opposite of resisting giving up. We work ourselves into a state of numbness and dissociation, and we really shut down. So what's interesting is that when we start to wake up and attend to ourselves, we're going to notice the numbness is going to fade and the dissociation is going to fade. We're going to be more present. And we're oftentimes pushing. Think in terms of push-pull. Think in terms of there's this force, this suffering, this intensity that we're trying to keep out, that we just are not able to manage. We're just not able to deal with. And so our psyche, our mind, our body pushes back. And living on the verge of giving up, where we don't give up, and we're just on the verge, we're just on the edge, we're living in a state of chronic tension. And that might be literal, that might show up in your body. It's also psychically, we're living in the state of chronic tension, where the tension becomes so normalized and internalized that we don't experience it as tension. It's just holding the dam, holding the wall, holding the door closed, and holding us in limbo. Now imagine what happens when we say we are going to choose to release, to let go, to surrender. I don't need to hold the door as tightly as I once did. I don't need to keep pushing against the thing that I don't want to look at. So when we do that, it is possible you're going to notice more pain and more suffering, because there's this aching force, where there's an aching that comes with releasing the force. And meaning the force as in the tension, the tension that was created by the two pushing, the opposing energies of that which needs attention and that which we cannot attend to. And we have been living with this chronic tension for some time. And if you take a break from it, the force, the energy that's pushing, the suffering, the part that needs attention, it's going to still keep pushing. And if you are taking a break from the pushing, you might notice an increase or an intensity to the aching. This scares us. When this happens, we very quickly scramble and we return to the old way of creating tension. And we say, no, I'm not going to do that. That's not, oh, this is scary now. This is making my life worse. And we're going to talk about, how we can do this in ways that are most prudent or resourced ways, or use your wisdom and discernment of how and when to do this. We do need to create some pre-planning and spaciousness around to allow this to happen, and to essentially allow yourself to recalibrate, readjust, and then also fall apart. And that includes framing this as, well, what is the goodness of falling apart? What is the goodness of giving up? We very easily can create the reasons why we are against giving up, and why we have judgments, and why we're resistant. But we also can invite the experience if we're willing to reframe, to think about, how is this going to help us in our life? Let me again take a quick look at my notes. I want to transition here real quick as acknowledging where we're at, keep going, and talk about privilege. Talk about socioeconomic challenges. Talk about the realities of life's demands and burdens, and that many of us cannot give up. It presents itself as impossible, and that in many ways we are the linchpin to our family's survival. We are the linchpin to our financial I'm not going to say financial security, because many people, the reason why they need to give up is they're working 2, maybe 3 jobs, or they have 1 or 2 very hard jobs, and then they go home and they parent, which means they punch the time clock for the new job at that point. And so having 2, 3 jobs and living for years, knowing how much you are relied on and that you can't stop. And this is a reality. And that an argument to be suspect of an invitation for giving up, to be suspect of even having this conversation, is to think how it's something that's offered to those who have opportunity, to those who have privilege, to those who financially can give up. Through my life, I have every so often have met people who are wealthier than I am, and I hear stories of going. I need to give up, so I'm going to go to the south of France, and I'm going to check into a hotel, and I'm going to participate in a retreat center experience. And let's not be judgmental of those who are able to do that. And yet we are also aware that many of us are not able to do that. And then it doesn't even have to be so rather a luxurious trip to the south of France. I mean, it could literally just mean, not working 7 days a week, or not having to work. Some people in the medical industry work 12 to 14-hour days. Yes, we assume sometimes they're compensated somewhat, in a way to financially function, and many times not. And we assume that within the calendar, the week, that working in such an environment, you have 3 or 4 days off. You're only working, 3 or 4, 12 or 14-hour days at a time. That being said, it's still exhausting to do this for 15 years or 7 years or 3 years, however long. And whatever your threshold point of feeling out of balance. And again, back to this belief of needing to be productive, produce more, stay busy, keep busy. And many of us are in situations that it appears absolutely impossible to even think about ending, to think about taking a break, to think that it could be any different. So number one, I want to affirm for you that these limitations are real, and there is an issue. It is legitimate to frame our understanding here as there's some opportunity and privilege afforded to certain groups of people that might not be afforded to you. And in this moment, we are not going to sugarcoat that, or just to assume that your struggle is going to, a solution to this struggle is going to be easy. It's not. And yet it's the same invitation to say, well, where is it workable? Where can you exhale? Where do you begin to gather some resource? That I feel confident that none of us are 100% without resource, be it our own internal awareness, be it our breath, be it working with our body. Just taking 5 minutes here and there when we can to begin a contemplative practice. And also education, reading, thinking about healing work, beginning to map out, well, what would we need to do to change that situation so that you could move into some kind of less work, and being able to get to a place where you can even start thinking about what resources you do or do not have. That's a really important point here. This whole idea of privilege, this whole idea of giving up is not afforded to everyone. Let's keep going, and I want to talk about how when we have this tension, that we're pushing up against this tension, this energy that we wanting to avoid looking at our own suffering, as I mentioned before, and you release that, and then there's some aching, that we're going to notice an intensity in ways that scares us, the intensity that this is hurting us now. And we realize that we've been pushing back. And I created a list of some of the things that in that moment, what happens, would start bubbling in. And these are going to be challenging, hard things to look at. But our shame starts to surface. And we start to feel grief. Old residual grief gets churned up. Life's disappointments get churned up. And we start accepting the realities of our losses. We realize that we can't keep shutting them out or being numb to them. And then we also start to realize what we didn't get. Back to disappointments. What the dreams that we thought life would look like one day, and we get to a place and we realize life is not looking like that. And we have to start being honest with ourselves. We're looking in the mirror. We're looking in the mirror of who we are. So, although this can be initially more painful than once we're working with it, the pain of it can subside. The invitation here is, who are you? The invitation is, who are you becoming? The invitation is to look in the mirror and let's do inventory of our life. And how incredibly overwhelming is that? I often share with clients, I've said this before, but imagine if you're in a room of 500 people and you're at a podium and you say, who here wants to feel their suffering? Who here wants to look at their suffering? How many people? Please raise your hand. And we know that many of us are not going to raise our hand. And that's the invitation. The goodness of giving up is that we don't have to fight any longer. And that we get a chance to invite some new resources. We get a chance to reframe the meaning of what is going on in our life. And we ultimately get a chance to do life review and to look at ourselves in a mirror. And there's this lovely Rumi poem that says, your grief lifts a mirror to where you are bravely working, expecting to see the worst. You look and see the face you've been wanting to see as your face. So this can be a frightening process initially if we're not used to knowing ourselves this way, and if we're not used to taking time to get to know ourselves this way. But being on the verge of giving up, contemplating giving up, practicing giving up, when we do that, what we're actually doing is saying, I want to know who I am. I want to know my experience more. I want to show up for who I am and begin to practice being a support for myself. And this is self-kindness. This is creating friendship with yourself. And there is some spaciousness that's afforded when we do this that's going to feel like vacation, that's really going to feel like rest, that's going to feel like taking a break, that's going to feel like surrender. And that's what we have not had for so long. And that's what we keep ourselves from, either for very legitimate good reasons that we're not ready to manage our trauma or manage the intensity of suffering. Many good reasons that we can't just stop this whole system that we've created because we know so many people rely on us. And to giving up then means letting others down. Some of us don't give up because of the thought of letting others down. So when we shut down, when we realize that it's time to take action and do something different, we can't avoid the truth of who we are. So right there is this recipe or a how-to step, is that giving up, we allow ourselves to shut down to keeping ourselves on the treadmill of depletion. And when we do this, there's an invitation to say, okay, let's take action and let's change. And at that point we say, well, how am I getting in my own way? And how am I not inviting change when I just keep going? So we're trying to make a case for the attractiveness of giving up, because we certainly, I've already named a number of reasons that we're going to be very suspicious and very cautious, because it's going to invite, let's look at our suffering. That is the skill. That's what we need here. And if we don't, we're going to continue on for the next 3 years living on the verge of overwhelm. If we don't, we'll live for the next 10 years or 12 years or 15 years, or maybe the rest of our life in this place of dissociated numbness, and in this place never realizing that giving up actually is a skill. And in order to reframe what's happening and see the resources, we have to be willing to be the thing that we're judging and think that we would never want to be. That means when we lose, we give ourselves permission to lose. If giving up means, well, then I'm going to feel even lonelier, we say, well, good, then let's be lonely. If giving up means being weak, then we invite that and say, I'm going to be the best weak I could ever be. And I need to learn how to be weak. I need to learn how to sit with my loneliness. I need to learn how to lose, and that I'm not getting what I want. And I can't keep fighting against the absence of what's not there. There's some truths that we don't want to see when we look in the mirror, when we look at our life, when we do inventory. And these are not easy. But for some of us, we bump into career and work. What kind of work that we're doing, how we're spending our day, the amount of time that we're working. And is it a job? Is it a career? Are we even afforded, are we in a situation in life where we're even afforded the option to create a career? Or are we in survival mode and investing in paycheck to paycheck living? So when we give up and we look at ourselves and we do life review, many of us think in terms of career and work and how it's such a great, huge source of depleting our energy, and it keeps us disconnected from feeling like we're living. Now, I do not have a knee-jerk response to that in saying, okay, then quit our jobs and we're just going to pursue the dream. I mean, that could be equally careless and lack any prudence. We're not just going to throw caution to the wind. If we arrive at a place where we need another job, and if giving up means really taking an honest look at the current work situation is unworkable, and it's taking too much than it's giving, and we need a plan to figure out how to get out of that situation and change and find the next job, the next stepping stone job, the next training, something that's going to propel us forward. Well, we do that with planning and prudence and give ourselves some spaciousness to figure it out. But if you're on the verge of giving up, if you invite giving up, if you enter the rest and the space of looking at your life, you might find that what's staring back at you as, what are you doing as far as work, and how does that need to change? We might also, when we invite giving up, be confronted with home and place and belonging. That might literally be the place that we live. It could be the city, the town, the location. It could be the actual home, the structure, the house, the apartment. Or it could also be a sense of belonging, that your environment mirrors back to you who you are. The phrase fish out of water comes to mind. There are many of us, by right of circumstance, are living in situations where we don't feel like we belong, and we feel like a fish out of water. And this really attacks our identity and sense of self, because we feel like we're inauthentic, or we feel like we just can't be ourselves, and that the outer world is not mirroring our inner world. So for some of us, when it is time to practice giving up, we're going to look at home and place and belonging, and we're going to have to take an inventory of what does this mean. And perhaps a move is on the horizon. But again, as I said in the previous point, let's not have a knee-jerk reaction. We're not just going to make some real big dramatic decision to all of a sudden move far away, somewhere. We're going to do it with some planning and some wisdom and figure out, okay, what's the stepping stone, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. If we do actually literally need to move, let's figure out how we're going to make that happen. And we work towards that as a goal. And that invites the goodness of giving up, is that it's going to help solidify a new plan. And where we're honest with ourselves and say, the current situation I'm in, that's not feeding me. And we need to err on the side that we can gather some resource and we can make a plan. The next one is some truth that comes out of looking in the mirror at ourselves, is that we inventory our relationships and we think maybe they have changed, maybe they have ended, and yet we have not ended them. Or maybe they are stale and they need some new life, and we really need to invest in what is that new life. Now, we also might have to be honest with ourselves about coping mechanisms, defense mechanisms, about ways in which, in order to try to make life manageable, we pursued trying to get our needs met in ways that ultimately won't serve us. So, for example, having an affair. So sometimes people who are on the verge of giving up, and when they finally give up and they have to inventory their life, they're also taking inventory of things like addictions and things like how they're hurting themselves around their financial spending. If it is in the area of addiction, we could say like it's having a gambling habit. Or it's also looking at how are we showing up in our relationships. And some of this includes, have we pursued an affair, or taking inventory and knowing that we're with a partner who has cheated, who is cheating, who has cheated multiple times, and yet we continue to stay in this kind of situation. So looking at ourselves is really looking at, well, what kind of relationships do we have in our life, and how is our inability to attend to those and take care of cleaning up whatever needs cleaned up, that in the meantime we're going to work really hard to distract ourselves, and we're going to deplete ourselves, and we're going to be in the pressure cooker, and we're just going to keep go because we're not willing to look at what needs to be looked at. Something else is depression might come into play. There's this idea I really like about overt depression and covert depression, and that covert depression is just under the radar and we don't even really totally know it for ourselves, and it might be experienced as an irritability, an anger, this chronic sense that is something wrong, but it's not wrong enough that we do something about it. And we have normalized living with the intensity of this covert depression, and to the point where we question, well, am I really depressed? I don't know, and we could compare ourselves to other people, people who appear to have more overt, obvious symptoms of depression. And we say, well, that's not me, and I'm going to work, and I'm high functioning. And sure, I get down, or sure, I feel, listless and apathetic from time to time, and my sleep patterns are a mess, and I have these anger outbursts, but I don't know. I don't think that I'm depressed. And what happens is, if we give up, and like we've already said, we open letting in all of it, and we might find that our covert depression moves into more of an overt depression, and some of the more overt symptoms might activate. And this is a byproduct of inviting, let's look at our life, let's enter a chapter of healing work, and that's going to mean being honest with ourselves about my depression. The depression needs attention, and we're going to do something about it. And it comes back to planning and being prudent and doing research and educating ourselves and seeking out consultation from those supporters, those therapists and doctors who have information that are really going to shore you up. When we're living on the verge of giving up, we feel so depleted. And so the act of giving up is a willingness to let in new nourishment. And that includes looking at, when we look at all these areas of our lives, we start to think about where we're lacking nourishment and where we might begin to find it. The next part of the video, the next part of my notes that I'm looking here is about how to give up. And how to give up, I've already been mentioning it. These are all about boundaries. So we could name the pre-planning logistics. If you are going to give up, let's not wait until you have a psychotic break. Let's not wait until you have exhaustion where you're hospitalized. Let's not wait until you have a heart attack. We can frame this as pre-planning and frame this as thinking about the logistics. What do you need? What does a person, I really like to think in general terms. What do all of us need if we're going to give up? How do we create an environment? How do we give ourselves some spaciousness? How are we going to take care of some of the basics if the basics are going to fall to the wayside? Or how can we begin to focus on the basics if we have been ignoring the basics for so long? And when I say basics, I mean get to bed at a reasonable time. I mean think about vegetables and eating healthy and vitamin C and vitamin B and going out in the sun to get vitamin D, etc., etc. And we are incorporating, we're choosing to slow down and choosing to rest. And that rest is so important, and that we have been denying ourselves that for some time. And just for the first 3 weeks, maybe a little longer, all we're doing in a very simple way is reacquainting ourselves with the art of leisure and the art of rest. Now, I am aware, as I've already said earlier, there are a number of people watching this video who work 2 jobs, who have to take care of a sick family member, who's also parenting other children, who has some commitments in the community, etc., etc. And then when you hear me say the art of leisure and learning how to rest, that, I can just picture you picking up the frying pan and throwing it at the computer screen or your phone as you're watching this. So take it slow. And this is, we do need to invite and to learn how to create moments of gap, moments of rest, moments where we take a break from the intensity of all that you have on your plate. And so, as off-putting, and I can imagine it sounds a bit lofty or luxurious to even say the art of leisure, that's what we need to reclaim. Do you know how to go for a walk and listen to the birds for 12 minutes as you walk around the block and breathe in the morning fresh air and to invite spaciousness of mind? That's the art of leisure. Do you know how to take a break from logging onto emails or checking your phone or feeling busy with doing everything and trying to maximize and say, for the next 7 minutes, I'm putting it on hold. I'm not going to check the washer and dryer. I'm not going to make sure, I'm not going to check in on the dishes. 7 minutes, the art of leisure. What can I do in this place? And to begin to find the things that nourish you, find the things that nurture you. And many of us don't even know what that is anymore. We're so out of touch. So I like to return when I think of basics. I think in terms of creativity. I think in terms of inviting some creative expression, some kind of hobby, something that gets the creative juices flowing, that just allow you to really move away from the routine. We're trying to find how do we create gaps in the routine. So if we want to fall apart, and we choose to, we're going to do some pre-planning with logistics. We're going to think about the resources that we need. And we're going to imagine, well, what would this look like? My falling apart, my giving up is going to be different from your giving up. We also want to choose timing. And how can we surrender here? Now, there's a real paradox here, is that we're talking about, with these boundaries, we're talking about creating surrender in a controlled way, controlled surrender. So right there, that's a paradox. In some ways that, it doesn't make sense, or those ideas it's counterintuitive. If I need to give up, and I'm going to stop working so hard to hold it all together. I need to surrender, but yet I can still do it in a controlled way. I don't need to do it with chaos and drama and have it get the best of me so that I have a breakdown in the middle of a meeting at work, or I have a breakdown, while I'm driving. These very, sometimes feel almost bizarre moments of these explosive, emotional, cathartic crying or anxiety, and we didn't plan on it. We didn't see it coming. And one reason why we didn't see it coming is because we didn't plan it. And so this controlled sense of surrender is to really think about, well, how can I have one of these meltdowns in a way that I choose when I want to have a meltdown, and that I want there to be cathartic release. And it's a skill to learn how to do that. I'm going to repeat a point that I said a little bit earlier, and this is about we want to be and to feel the thing that we label as unattractive. So there's this idea in therapy and healing work that we're integrating opposites. And it's very easy to help find some footing or a path or direction of what we need to do if we think in terms of the opposite or moving closer into the thing that is unattractive. So for example, we want to be someone who loses, and we're letting ourselves lose. And that doesn't mean that we're going to feel consumed with being denied and consumed with feeling depleted. It's more of this idea that it's okay if we don't get what we wanted, and that we can practice and invite tolerating that in a way that there's an exhale and say, everyone loses, life is full of losses, and you know what, right now, giving up, I have to be honest with all of these losses, and I'm really gonna practice losing. That's very different from saying we're gonna practice going after being happy. We're gonna practice getting what you want. And that can be important too down the road. And we do need agency. We do need to have a vision for our future and a star on the horizon and say, well, this is the plan I'm working towards. And in the meantime, we're not working towards it. We don't need to achieve or get something, or one day we'll be happy when we get this thing. And instead say, we're not framing it around what if I am or am not happy. I'm framing it as what's the reality as is right now, and that I'm aware that I've lost a number of things, and I've been running for a really long time, fighting against, letting in the reality of these losses. So in this moment, the best thing I can do is I'm really going to practice losing. And there's an activeness in that. It's not passive. I really have to figure out, how can I practice losing? And that to do so doesn't mean I'm wounded. It's a legitimate, honest, necessary reality of life that we're going to lose. And I can lose. It's okay. And I don't need to work so hard and fight giving up to just feel these feelings. Along the same lines, when we do this, is that we let in grief. And so when we notice the grief bubbling up, we say, well, my goal is to practice grieving. How can I grieve? What does it mean to grieve well? What are the skills that we need to grieve? Along the same lines, thinking of being weak. And again, I mentioned this earlier. So the goal is let yourself be weak. If giving up means a person is weak, then that's your job. Your job is to be weak. And to frame it from how is it okay to be weak? What's the beauty of being weak? What's the goodness? What's the purpose of being weak? And what is your incredible attachment to needing to be strong? And how is that not serving you? There are certainly, yes, very much a number of situations in life when we need strength and we need to be strong. There are also a number of situations in life where we need to enter our weakness and to not force. Stop forcing. Let's practice being weak. Another one is If we give up, a person who is giving up is lonely and is going to experience loneliness. So as we've already given in these other examples, same thing applies here. The goal then is to be lonely and say, well, let's be curious. What does it mean to live with loneliness? And how is this very similar and familiar to what we felt before? And how might it be different? What are we noticing about the levels and the layers, the flavor of loneliness? And that we might actually surprise ourselves and realize that we're touching upon a solitude, a quietness, a contemplative place of knowing ourselves that initially felt prickly and painful and like boredom and unsettled and can't be with ourselves. And something starts to shift because we're saying, well, I'm here, I'm choosing to give up and be with myself. And I'm going to invite the loneliness. The other one is when we're denied what we wanted and we didn't get it. This links to losses and just realizing, you know what, I'm not going to get that one thing that I've worked so hard for. Or I'm not going to be able to live the dream of who I thought I was going to become. And that it feels like that dream is even more, that person, that life that I imagined, in a way, I really think the door has closed on that. I am of a certain age. I have missed the window of opportunity to make that happen. Now, for some things, we might really challenge ourselves and say, I don't care what age it is. I don't care that I missed the opportunity, or life told me that I missed the opportunity. I'm going to go get it. And we can, but please first rest before you go do that. And you'd have to think about, okay, well, if it does appear that that window of time has closed, what other resources, I feel like I've said the word 12 times here, what other resources might you need in order to resurrect that dream? In the meantime, let's know that it's there, and that also let's grieve and let's look at accepting how it didn't happen the first time around. And we don't have to keep fighting against the fact that it didn't happen. This one important thing that we wanted to happen didn't happen. It's okay that we let things go. This is part of our grief work. This is a practice of what it means to give up. I have an example here of this has come up with a number of clients. And this idea of opposites and integrating opposites and working with the thing that we don't want to be. And that I'm going to frame it, there's multiple applications of this, but one application would be a client who believed that she needed to be the good girl and that she needed to follow the rules and she needed to be an overachiever and she needed to get praise for her great accomplishments. And she developed what we would call performance-based esteem, where her worth is based upon her achievements and making sure that she gets accolades or noticed for her great contribution. But in the process, she gets lost and she's not getting noticed for just being herself. And she's overly identified with being the good girl. And she's good and she's kind and she's nice and she just does all the good, nice things. And she's actually overextended and she's exhausted and she's on the verge of giving up. So in that example of working with opposites, we would think, well, what is the opposite of the good girl? And there's many answers here. And also I'm sensitive that some audience members watching videos, I rarely use any kind of curse word, but I'm aware that some people find it alienating and other people don't care. But so heads up, it's okay. We're going to use the word bitch. And the idea is that, maybe the opposite is to be, to invite more of the bitch self. And that the good girl needs to take a break from being the good girl, and being on the verge of giving up and giving up is to strengthen and invite living more in the energy of the bitch self. And this is highly subjective. This is highly personal. It's actually very creative because the conversation will be, well, what does that look like for you? If you can put down and take a break from working so hard at being the good girl, and that doesn't necessarily, we're not inviting saying, you're going to break the law, or you're going to fundamentally confront your own values and morals and become a bad person. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about putting down the presentation, the artifice, the inauthentic, the constant upholding of the persona. Oh, look, be the good girl. It doesn't, gender aside, be the good person, be the, act like the nice guy, be the nice guy. That's a phrase that people often use. And if you're going to entertain no longer fulfilling that role, that to give up, being on the verge of giving up and then giving up is about taking a break from that role. And what might that look like? And something that's fun that I've done with clients is like, well, what if you spend the 3-day weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and you're going to be your bitch self? And the first thing you need is a new outfit. You need to go shopping. How does bitch self dress differently from the good girl? And what kind of restaurant will the bitch self go to, which is different from where perhaps the good girl might go to? And how do you make coffee in the morning? How do you approach your chores throughout the day or housework? Or how do you make plans and interact with friends differently? Now, again, the goal is not to, be a jerk and alienate people. The goal is to realize, almost like an actress. I love framing this in terms of, if you're an actor, that you are taking on a character. And many of us are on the verge of giving up and exhausted and depleted and living in a pressure cooker because we're playing this role. And we have not expanded. We have not gone to our agent or the casting director or the director of the film and say, you know what? I want to change my character. I need more range. I need more range because this good girl thing, this nice guy thing, this whatever whatever we label that particular persona has taken over and it's running us in the ground. And we don't have a lot of balance. So one way to find balance is start thinking in terms of opposites. And how can you be a bit other than who you are now? And there can be spontaneity, adventure, and freedom in doing that. Now, please know this is all an experiment. This approach might not work for you, or you might do it for one weekend and realize, oh, that was a big waste of time. Well, before you totally throw it away, maybe do it one more time a couple weeks later just to, explore and think about it in a different context, and also empower yourself as the information I'm sharing here. These are suggestions for you. Back to self-directed healing work means you decide if this does or doesn't resonate with you. You have to decide, you have to pick and choose and organize these invitations or these skills. Again, I think this is the 23rd time I said these resources in a way that is workable for you. So it's possible that some of what I'm sharing doesn't apply to your situation, and that's okay too. Let's think about coming to an end. I guess I have one more point here, and I think about different wisdom traditions and contemplative practices like meditation, and I'm aware of in Buddhism, in Taoism, there is a idea, a tenet, a principle of Taoist teaching, which is that of non-action or inaction. This does not mean laziness. This does not mean doing nothing in a passive sense, but it means doing nothing in an active sense. And it's choosing to acknowledge that you are not in control and at the center of the universe creating everything around you, that there are all of these forces working around you and supporting you. And sort of like energy, rivers of energy that are coming into your life and moving out of your life. Just think in terms of the seasons. You don't really have to do anything for the seasons. They're just happening around you. And you respond, or the seasons interact with you. In winter when it's cold, the coldness is interacting with you, and you decide to put on a coat. And you did not have to create that whole scenario. you're adapting and responding to the flow of change as it's already occurring around you. So this is a philosophy, and you don't need to really dive into Taoism to get some mileage out of or begin to entertain this idea of non-action as a choice, and non-action is an active, not a passive way of participating in giving up. And that so much of this, up to this point, we've been talking about preparing and having boundaries and things that you can do, be it going to be a mini giving up, or if it's a much larger extended period of time where you need to give up. But sometimes we don't have to plan anything. And it's about, let's frame where we're at from the place of non-doing. And we are not going to be trying to force something to happen, force ourselves to rest, force ourselves to relax, force ourselves to find spaciousness. Instead, we're going to tune into life is happening around us already. And how can I let life shore me up and support me? How do I pay attention to the life that's already living around me, where I don't have to organize and orchestrate and work so hard to make a life within that living? It's already happening. And this is linked to the idea of get out of your own way and quit trying so hard. And notice how you're forcing something that cannot be forced. And this includes tap into the natural rhythms, and the metaphor, the analogy of seasons is very helpful here. Let time pass. Observe the flowers bloom out of the ground. Observe, in springtime, how the trees begin to, leaves, little buds begin to form. And the whole cycle is just going. Even in this moment as I speak, it's happening. Nature is happening. Whether or not I take a break or not, whether or not I give up or not, life is already happening around me. So sometimes giving up could be really thinking about, let's enter inaction. This is the opposite of productivity and busy, going, doing. The action of non-action, that is a skillful choice. And we realize that there's something bigger around us and that we don't have to create it. One way to frame this is to enter grace. Some people can resonate with the word grace, and it also can take on a spiritual religious connotation. And when we say the phrase, there's something bigger happening around us, well, that could be a gateway, if this does resonate with you, to then think in spiritual terms. Giving up, being on the verge of giving up and actually listening, pay attention, give up, could be entering spiritual practice, could be activating your own spiritual knowing, could be turning on, seeing the world, seeing yourself, seeing your situation through the lens of spirituality, as opposed to the lens of survival. You have to define. There's many ways to define what spirituality might or might not mean for you. I also think a gateway for me personally is poetry. Can very much, especially mystic poetry, can invite thinking about seeing life through a spiritual lens. And how when I'm on the verge of giving up, that's an indicator in my body, and what my mind is telling me is that I am disconnected from spiritual practice, and I'm not letting in spiritual nourishment. This would be a topic of the next video, or a video in the future. What perhaps might that mean? And it means many things to a number of people. My shorthand response that I really like for myself personally is, I call it finding ocean. When you stand at the edge of the ocean and you are overtaken by the smells and the vastness and the sound of the seagulls and the crashing water and the hissing of the waves and the undulation, the movement of the water, and you feel so small and so insignificant, and yet against the sunset and the incredible vastness, you then all of a sudden feel completely full of awe and inspiration and this magnificent nature speaking to you and how you realize that your smallness in comparison to the hugeness of the ocean somehow actually gives you a sense of comfort and balance. And you realize, wow, there's a lot more going on here than just what I'm grappling with in my head. And all of these things I'm fighting with, as far as not giving up, I really need to seek out. I really need to invite the spiritual inspiration. I really need to go find ocean. I think that's a good way to end. A bit poetic, talking about ocean. The last note I just looked at was this idea that this serves as a gateway. It could mean take a break. Being on the verge of giving up could mean you need a 3-day break, you need a 3-week break, and then you'll return to business as usual, and you'll just keep doing the same things, which that's a choice, and we need to do that sometimes. We, again, self-directed healing work, we discern when we would or wouldn't want to enter a purposeful, mindful falling apart and to invite deeper levels of looking at our suffering. And it's very personal, and we're not always in a place. It's always not the right time to do it. So maybe this video is about thinking about taking a break. Maybe this video is about entering the gateway of a new chapter of your healing work. And you get to decide how you want to apply that. So let's create some ending for today. Let's bring the video to a close. I have 2 questions for you. What did you learn? And what is your takeaway? Please share your reflections in the comment below, and I welcome reading your comments. Also, if you have benefited from this video and you value my work, please consider becoming a sustaining supporter like I mentioned at the beginning of this video. You can check out links in the description for more information. And thank you in advance for your support. I do want to say a few words about why we do this work. Our attachment trauma keeps us disconnected in our relationships. It keeps us disconnected from ourselves. And this disconnect is very painful. And we spend many, many years trying to uncover what is the disconnect, how did this happen, and how is this influencing our relationships. And if we don't do that, we either are set up to fail or notice that we do fail. So the good news, and this is really good news about healing attachment trauma, about all kinds of trauma, is that when we engage in healing work around trauma, that a lot of positive data, a lot of positive testimonials that healing trauma is possible. So we can learn to heal our deepest connections, and I like to add to that we are healing our deepest disconnections. So please take from this video some encouragement to know that there's hope, that we do this work because relationships are important and because emotional connections matter. Thank you for watching. Now go out there and create loving relationships and experiment with giving up. Thanks for watching.